Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. That was a quick interval. I feel the curtains back up. We are back on track, so please take your seats quiet. Please, plenty of talking to be done in the networking areas or in the breaks. So let's bring the tone down slightly. Let's bring it back. So from our Hollywood superstar to an industry superstar, please let me welcome to the stage Dominic Proctor, who is the Global President for GroupM.
Thank you, Jeremy. I must say, though, that I'd much rather have Mitch Canner introduce me than Jeremy. You're not very good at this, Jeremy. Mitch Canner would have spent 10 minutes going through my own list of Oscar nominations and Golden Globes, and it's a shame. But next time, perhaps you could take over from Jeremy. I would like it more. So here we are again, and this it's an important meeting, and congratulations to getting to 10, Charlie, because I always feel good when we can discuss an industry and a part in an industry that really is very important, very successful, very interesting, very dynamic, helps changing the world in a kind of very positive way. The watch out, I was reminded when I arrived here last night, was, and the kind of strange thing really is that we're having this conversation in a city where there was another kind of empire all those years and years and years ago that did some fantastic things to change the world, but then got rather kind of complacent and lazy and didn't really start delivering advantages in the same way as it used to its constituents, and began to kind of crumble and die. And I think that's one thing that we have to be very mindful of as we speak over the next 2 days about the fact that this industry that we're in has grown wonderfully and is set to grow still further, I think. But it has within it that kind of temptation also to get it wrong. The other thing about Rome, which you might not know, is that Charlie mentioned that Facebook wasn't even around in Venice when we had the first conference 10 years ago, but actually Rome was the place where Facebook launched its first dislike just a few years ago. A nice performance from a very slightly younger Charlie Cray there, I thought, but how nice anyway in those days when it wasn't democratic at all. You could just make all the decisions, give all the opinions yourself, and then people would do your bidding. So we've now got a more democratized world, of course, and opinions have become more democratized, not quite so fateful as it was for that particular individual, but nevertheless much more profound and important, I think. And I think it's a very interesting brief for this morning, that it is about opinion to some extent, because we live in a world now, our business, I think, is surrounded and actually dominated by facts and by data, that it's good to sort of step back from time to time and give opinion. So the brief for me was to look back at the 10 years subsequent to Venice and then have a poke at looking forward a little bit as well. When I looked back, I got a hold of a lot of the material that was around then. I even looked at the talk I gave, which was under this title here, Our Job is to Manage Change. And we spoke then, and the whole, I think, atmosphere of the conference then was to talk about how we were at an inflection point. Perhaps we always are at an inflection point, and therefore never at an inflection point. But we, at the time, thought we were at an inflection point of change, and that change would bring within it opportunity, because change always does, doesn't it? Change creates chaos and disruption. And it makes the job of an agent, the person in the middle whose job is to make sense of change, all the more important. So to some extent, I guess our health check looking back over 10 years is, have we taken the opportunity as an industry? And I'm really specifically referring to the media agency industry, but the industry more generally, to capitalize on that change. So it's a kind of interesting brief. The way it was characterized 10 years ago was whether or not the media agency industry then could, as it were, get a seat at the top table. This was the kind of vernacular used in that particular debate. Whether the ad agencies would stay in their position, or whether, as in Charlie's introduction this morning, whether the media, he wrongly referred to them as media buying agencies, by the way, but whether the media agencies could step up to get a place at the kind of at the adult table. This was another way of putting it. This was a quote from, I think it was the London Guardian who reported on that conference to talk about how when they listened to our conference, they said this was an attempt for the media buyers and the buyers in the industry to kind of storm the the citadel of the creatives. I actually never saw it that way. I mean, it was quite aggressive, I think, the agenda that we all put out there then. I think it certainly was, and mine certainly was. But I never actually saw it as a war, because I think in business, it's Darwinian, isn't it? I mean, you put out what you want to try and do, and if there's a supply and demand equation, if the clients want to come with you, they come with you, and if they don't, they don't. So I think the Darwinian development of our business is actually the thing that really strikes us. And I think, therefore, if you look at the Facebook, thumbs up or thumbs down, if you had to say in general terms in those last 10 years, how did we do? Did we do pretty well or pretty badly? I would say it was equivocal, actually. I would say it was neither one nor the other, because I think whilst we have perhaps got a seat at the big table, at the adults table, I don't think it is the key seat. I think that is still a challenge. In fact, I think it's a seat that still is vacant. And I say that for lots of reasons, and we'll perhaps talk about them as these days go by. But one of the reasons is, I think, because of the way that clients now in the marketing fraternity are surrounded by people all whispering opinions into their ears, that the role of the vacant seat is to act not just as a key advisor, but as the integrator of that advice. And I think that's a role which, in a continuingly fragmenting and chaotic world, will become an even more important role. So that seat remains vacant. In terms of specific topics that we discussed 10 years ago, and this is kind of curious because 10 years isn't a particularly long time, the major talking point, of course, was digital. I mean, there were topics on the agenda about, will it really work? Is digital really something we have to kind of take much notice of? Well, this, I think, is a tick, in the sense that I think the media fraternity, the media agency business within that, have absolutely stepped up to the mark. I mean, media now in the digital investment management, if you like, is now 30% of the total around the world, or it will be in this year by our estimates. And I think the way digital has been integrated and indeed now leads the way we work with clients and with media owners on behalf of their brands is actually remarkable. If you have the opportunity to step back those 10 years and look the way it was being discussed in those days, it is transformative for sure. So absolutely a thumbs up, but with a little warning, which is that I think as we look forward to how this aspect of our business might challenge us in the future, it's more about the strategic leadership of where the digital component of what we do and what our clients want is going to become strategically even more valuable. And by the way, the marketplace that backs it up and how that goes to market and the integrity of that market becomes of fundamental importance. But nevertheless, a thumbs up. The other big issue, and again, 10 years ago, right, which was forecast to be a dominant force in our market, was in branded content. And actually, we heard a bit about that just now, or content in general, if you like, not necessarily branded. And I think I'm very interested to hear what Steve just said about that, because I completely agree with him. I think this is a resounding thumbs down, actually. And this is no disrespect to anybody who makes their living in this area, but I think we haven't, as an industry, really scaled up the opportunity that existed then and exists now for our part of the world to join Steve's part of the world on behalf of our mutual clients and to join up the dots more clearly. He mentioned it was pressures of time and bandwidth. Well, maybe, but I think where there is a demand, that tends to create a supply, and I would be surprised, I think, going forward if we don't all begin to realize the ambition that we laid down 10 years ago, that our business will become as much about content and the development of content as it was about the exploitation of and development of kind of digital channels. So I would say probably a thumbs down for that, not scaled. Then the third piece, which was well documented in that conference in Venice, was a bit spooky, actually, because not many of us really knew what it really all meant. And I certainly was one of that number, because it was around the areas of science and data and technology and how the kind of digital revolution would inevitably somehow lead to an increasing reliance on data and technology, and the interpretation and application of data would mean to us and to our companies and then to our clients. I think none of us forecast then, I certainly didn't, how much it would take in dollars to invest in that kind of aspect of support to our business. I mean, I think we all knew we had to get into the technology and data business. I think we all missed the mark by a long way in terms of figuring out how much that would be and how to go about it. We went about it in different ways, of course. That's the way markets work. Again, some holding companies outsource their data and technology requirements. Others, and mine included, WPP, insourced it. We invested in the technology and the data stacks ourselves. But whichever model you took, I think all of us underestimated perhaps how much it would take. And then I think the other thing we didn't do well, and we're still not doing well as an industry, I'm not talking about any particular company, and certainly not just mine, is that we didn't then, having invested so much in this area and made it a key kind of strategic platform for the agencies, then explain it properly to clients. I think we still have a difficulty in telling the story about how the exploitation of data and the application of that data to brand challenges is to the benefit of those clients. So I think in that kind of general area, if digital was a thumbs up and content was a thumbs down, I'd say that data and technology is probably neither one or the other, somewhere caught in the middle. And then the last big theme from 10 years ago is a resounding one. It probably existed, in fact, it certainly did exist 10 years before, 20 years before, and no doubt will exist in 10 years and 20 years' time, which is the challenge, the relentless, always-on challenge of finding the right levels of talent in the business. I think talent acquisition is, of course, important. It's none the less important as we move into a more automated and real-time phase, of course, but nevertheless a very important aspect of what we do. I think we have become fairly good at bringing in a more diverse body of talent. I mean diverse in every possible sense of the word, by the way. So we have now, the scientist sitting next to the guy who's the liberal arts graduate, and the code writer and the copywriter sitting in the same room, if you like. I mean, I think we are a more diverse population than we were then. But I would say that a big challenge for the next generation of management, beyond my generation anyway, is to ensure that that pool of talent, the depth of that pool of talent, runs deeper, because it is too shallow. And we don't attract, anywhere in the world, by the way, anywhere in the world, we don't attract enough A-list, A-grade, AAA grade graduates into our business. A particular challenge, if you go back to the Economist data in the markets which are going to represent our future, where the talent pool for what we do and our requirements is shallower still. So I would say talent, probably equivocal, probably neither a thumbs up nor a thumbs down. And then a big piece of what we spoke about last week, 10 years ago, was in this area, which was to do with partnerships and competitors and frenemies. I don't know whether anybody in the room remembers this, but it was certainly the kind of the main thing that I spoke about in my keynote 10 years ago, which was that if we could foresee, as we did, that our businesses would all become much broader and that therefore we would be fighting on many different fronts. We would be moving, as it were, from the corner of the stage to the center of the stage. Then that's a dangerous strategy in some ways, because you're surrounded, therefore, by more enemies, aren't you? You're surrounded by more competitors. And I think, and I remember I went back to my notes, that doesn't signal that it was a bad strategy, not at all. It signals that it was a brave but correct strategy, because it's a sign of growing up. If you're in the middle of the stage, it's a sign of growing up. The question is, how do you cope with that? And I think the way we have coped with that has been pretty good. Actually, as an industry, we've kind of surrounded or circled our wagons pretty well. We now do fight on lots of different fronts. We compete with lots of different kinds of company. And generally speaking, we do that fairly well. But it comes back, in my opinion, to the challenge of talent. I think if we're going to stay rooted in the center of the stage and sit in the vacant chair of the key advisor and integrator, then that, again, requires a lot more investment. But generally speaking, I think we have done that pretty well. I think we have become, I think we used the phrase at the time, quite ambidextrous. We were used to talking to companies that would be a friend one day, an enemy the next, a partner the next, and even a client the day after that. So much more, less binary and much more open-minded about the way we react and the way we go to market. Okay, well, those were the main things at the time. Those are the main themes 10 years ago. Just looking for a snapshot at today and then the future in the remaining 10 or 12 minutes. For 2016, where we are now, I mean, we've all got our own opinions on this, I suppose. But I guess the overall issue literally today is the one that Charlie, again, referred to at the beginning, which is the issues around trust and transparency. Again, I'm not going to dwell on this. There's not time to do that today. But quite clearly, if we are going to maintain this kind of senior position in the hierarchy, then any issues to do right down the value chain, by the way, from clients all the way through via the agencies and the media providers and the consumers, all the way down the value chain, there has to be a much greater element of trust and transparency. I totally believe 100% that that will be solved, is being solved. I do believe, and I'm not complacent in the slightest about this, but I do believe it's a growing pain. As companies grow and industries grow and fragment, they become more complicated, and with complication comes that kind of fractured trust and behavior sometimes. So we do need to repair that, but it will be repaired. I think much more fundamental than that is the next issue, which is around the integrity of the market itself. And here I know there'll be presentations and discussions about this during these next two days, so I won't dwell on this either. But I think unless the industry, if we're saying that this is the future of our industry, the digital marketplace and the way we go to the marketplace, if it's as profound as that, which we believe it is, then it is up to the industry, all parts of the industry, particularly the people who own the platforms and the governments who regulate them. I mean, I'm fairly proud, actually, of the fact that our company, and I think the other companies with whom we directly compete, spend a lot of time trying to help clients clean up the act and the marketplace of the digital economy. I'm not sure if other people who populate that economy do enough, but without integrity in the marketplace going forward, there is no marketplace. So I think as we sit and look at the business today, that's absolutely a key imperative. Another one which kind of comes out of that in a way is the way TV itself is going to continue to evolve. We heard about that just now from Steve from a creative point of view, and I completely agree with him. I think what he was saying was that there is now a very, very strong body of work coming out of whether it's Hollywood or Bollywood or whichever other wood it comes from. I think long-form television content, however it's delivered through whichever device and mechanism and technology, is very, very strong. I think the challenge for us, of course, is how we exploit that on behalf of our clients. And I think there's not enough spoken, actually, about the way that a lot of our attention is being concentrated now on addressable television. For example, I think if you marry the content story with the technology and data story, which allows us to track and to exploit and to find the right people with the right messages, then addressable television, I would assert, is going to become absolutely the next driving force behind the development of the media business. There are other issues that surround us today, and we've touched on them already, so I won't go into them again. For example, ad blocking. This goes back to the integrity of the digital marketplace. There has to be much more time spent on this because we can't trade in a market that has no particular integrity. So just on the clock, which says I've got 7 minutes left, I want to just throw a few thoughts out there for the future, having tried to kind of learn a bit from the past. I think clearly I think it's always the case, isn't it, that the direction of change is probably easier to predict than the pace of that change. It's more difficult to predict. But if we think, as I think most people do think, that the last 10 years since Venice changed more than the 50 years that went before that, then I think it's also safe to assume that the next, should we say, 3 years from Rome will change more than the previous 10 years did. So that it's becoming quite exponential and frightening. So this road that we're on is absolutely not for the faint-hearted. But I think we can say with some certainty that, again, the direction of change is relatively easy to predict. And I think the first thing to say about that is that the story on data, which I painted just now from 10 years ago, is only going to increase. Our reliance on data is going to become more and more and more. And the way we use data and support data and use technology to bring that data alive. We will become effectively, maybe we already have become, data management businesses, as well as, or maybe even sometimes instead of, media investment management businesses. It's a data business that we work in. On the agency side, it's important to say, well, if everything is automated and data-led and technology, then what is the thing we can bring up beyond that? Why can't the algorithm writers, the code writers, just use that data and kind of get it all done? The fact is, and here's the kind of special sauce, if you like, for the agency business anyway, is that unless we can also bring, beyond that, the human levels of objectivity and creativity that Steve discussed in terms of the creative piece of that, then the answer is nothing. The answer is that actually it's, again, supply and demand. If clients and marketing companies can do things themselves that they don't get benefit from pushing out to partners, then they will. Why wouldn't they? So I think what the agencies bring to this world of automated, real-time, hardcore data is an objectivity. We can, we put our tall ladders up against the walls of the walled gardens and look over them, look over all of them, not just one, not just two, not just three, not just the one we work for, but all of them. And I think the way that the media agency can capture objectivity as a kind of sound, as a business platform is crucial, because we have to have the ability to look at all of the marketing opportunities for a client, including content, including any other new service platform that we haven't even yet discovered. So objectivity that comes out of data, crucial. The next kind of safe bet, if you like, is that even more than now, in fact, overwhelmingly, the world, whether it's in 3 years or 10 years' time that we look back on this, will be more about mobile and more about apps and whatever the next derivation of an app is, but more wearable, more implanted, more intuitive mobile devices, more apps. Here's a different kind of challenge that throws up in my view, because if this is true, and I think inevitably it will be, you could argue about the pace, but not the direction, I believe. The challenge becomes one of, for the creative community actually as much, and the marketing community as much as it is for us, because I think we have the ability to track those eyeballs, to find out who is where and when and what they're thinking and what they're doing and what they've just bought and what they want to buy. I do think, though, that there is a massive, fundamental and sometimes never said elephant in the room here, which is that the ability of our community, in the broadest sense of that word, to get creative messages that truly are impactful and breakthrough in that completely different environment than the one that people like Steve were trained on when they were in art school all those years ago, is fundamental. It's absolutely fundamental. You think about the implications of that. Because if we don't, then this next safe bet becomes more problematic, which is that the world would become more and more and more about e-commerce. This is already a $2 trillion business. It's almost 10% of the world's trade currently is already e-commerce trade. That will double, and then it will double again, right? And much of those transactions and the fulfillment of those transactions will happen on the mobile device, which is carrying the message, which encourages the transaction. It's a circle. I'm just not quite sure whether, as an industry yet, we're properly equipped to take advantage of that. One thing as an industry I think we are equipped to take advantage of is my last prediction, which is this, which is that even though the world is more automated, even though the world will become more real-time, online, algorithm-driven marketing, there will always be, of course, the need for the opinions, the thumbs up, the thumbs down. There will always be, I think, that human factor of ingenuity that agencies can bring to a client's problems. The additional challenge, I think, is that in those days, in 10 years' time, when someone looks back at this conference, there won't be things called advertising agencies or media agencies or public relations agencies. All of those different descriptors, internal descriptors, will have disappeared. I'm sure of that. There'll be an agency. It probably won't be called an agency. It'll be called something else. There'll be another name given to it. But it'll be everything, right? We'll be doing everything. And sometimes it will not, in fact, normally I think it won't be owned by the same corporation, which goes back to a point which others have made this morning already and no doubt will make constantly during the next 2 days, which is that the whole thing requires more and more and more relentless collaboration. Collaboration of specialists, the artists and the scientists working together. Collaboration. And by the way, I think, to finish on that point, that because the data and technology that we've already discussed will allow us to attribute the value of each individual's contribution to a project then the collaboration will pay quite literally as well as in terms of reputation. So those would be my predictions going forward. I think, I've always thought this actually, that thinking through these kind of predictions, thinking through the kind of business models that we all have to create to take advantage of this, in a sense, is the easier bit, really, usually. Getting it done is the tricky bit. It's much tougher to get it done than it is to think about it. So I think my ambition for these conferences always is that the people from our companies who attend them and those that speak at them should have a real focus on, okay, we've worked it all out, the theory sounds sound, go away and figure out how to get it done and then review it. And I guess, just to finish, Charlie, I guess, with this exponential pace of change, let's not wait 10 years to have a 10-year birthday party, because I guess if I'm right and there's going to be more change in the next 3 years than the last 10 years, then we can review the next 10 years in 3 years' time, if you're still with me. But probably it wouldn't be called media and it probably wouldn't be in Rome, and I might well have retired. But in the meantime, thank you very much.